Yo, what is up, guys? It's your boy Blind Nick Unfiltered here, back with another video. Gonna be talking more of The Walking Dead, guys. And in today's video, we are gonna be breaking down how did Rick actually wake up from his coma? How did Rick manage to wake up and survive this coma, guys? So let's go ahead and get right into it. As you guys can see here, we got the dead flowers. You know how it is when he first woke up. He reaches over, he grabs the dead flowers because he remembers whenever Shane brought those flowers to him. And the last he remembers, those flowers were, perfectly alive. Everything was good. Next thing you know, he's waking up and he has no clue what he is waking up to, guys. But yeah, like I said, we're going to get right into it. Y'all be sure to drop a like for your boy if you guys haven't already. And subscribe if you guys are new around here. We're going to be talking everything The Walking Dead related. And like I said, let's get right into it, guys. So I know most people always find this very controversial. They feel like, how is it possible? How did Rick manage to survive? You know, he was in there for weeks in this coma. I believe they say it was like 4 to 5 weeks he was in this coma. And how did he manage to do this? You know, you can only go like 3 days or so without water. And so, how is this actually possible? Well, guys, in 2012 or 2013, one around that time frame, AMC actually released an official webisode series where they had 3 different episodes discussing The Walking Dead: The Oath. And I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but basically in there they explain some of the background and some of the story about what happened, and they kind of break it down. Basically, Dr. Gail McNeil, she decided to stay behind and dedicate, her life to her patients. And while most of the medical staff, the doctors, the nurses, most of them either fled and left out of there once, chaos happened and the crap hit the fan. A lot of them either left or was killed. Then you had the military come in and take over the Harrison Memorial Hospital, and less than a couple weeks go by, and of course, the hospital has fallen. And that's when we see Shane come in, and Shane is bringing the flowers, as we seen. And of course, as Shane is leaving, he is, he sees the military come in, start blasting people. And so Shane decides to kind of shield him to the best way he can. Since he can't get him out of there, he takes one of those heavy gurneys on wheels and just pushes it right up against his door, which thankfully, probably kept most of the people out, but also would keep any walkers out, anything like that. So that was a huge plus on his part. I'm sure, that helped out a lot. But also, Dr. Gale being there, even after the military left, after the supplies quit coming in, she stayed behind taking care of all these patients, that were still hooked up to all these machines, that were on life support, that couldn't get out of bed, other people that were just like Rick in this comatose state. But, speaking of being in a comatose state, for those of you who don't know, usually when your body is in that kind of a state, your metabolic rate slows down. You kind of go into a conservation mode where you don't need to have as much energy. You don't need to have as much liquid and as much water to be able to survive. So the body can survive on a lot less. And let's be real, guys. For those of you who are thinking that's absolutely, mind blowing that he survived this, I mean, we are watching a show about walkers and people being reanimated, and so like if that's a deal breaker for you guys, then I don't know what you're doing watching a show about zombies. You know what I mean, boys? But anyways, getting right back into it, the way I look at it is hey, she was over there taking care of all these patients. She was going around and she was making sure, like, using whatever supplies that she had left, scavenging from the other parts of the hospital, taking, saline bags, continuing that drip for Rick to be able to stay alive. And she was there, for several weeks. But of course, as the military support quit, as they quit bringing supplies, as the world started to collapse around her, so did her mental state. She started to lose all hope. She started to realize, like, hey, it's pointless. What am I even doing here? So she started offering a lot of the patients who weren't as bad off as Rick, that were awake still, that could actually, hey, I can give you a way out here. I would, like to offer you this option if you don't want to be continuing to fight this losing battle that we know is going to inevitably, I'm going to run out of supplies at some point and everything. And if you do just try to leave, then you're just going to be torn up by all these walkers. So the best bet for you is to just let me, put you to sleep peacefully. And she was actively euthanizing a lot of the patients. Thankfully, and for Rick's, in Rick's case, he, was still in this comatose state, so she didn't have the chance to offer this to him. And thankfully, she didn't just take it upon herself to put him to sleep, even further. And so, with Rick actually, still being having this, a little bit of IV drip coming in from the saline bags, that was just enough to continue to keep him alive. That combined with the conservation, state that his body was in. And of course, after I'd say, about 4 weeks in, before Rick ever wakes up, there are some other survivors that come at, this is way after she's lost her mind, and Gail is really going through it. She's putting a bunch of patients to sleep, and she just has lost all hope. That's when these survivors, Paul and Karina, show up. And I'm not sure exactly, I can't remember if they were like looking for some help or if one of them were hurt. I can't remember. If any of you guys know, just let me know in the comments below. But basically, guys, they show up there, and whenever they show up, of course, Paul and Karina end up running into a lot of the walkers that are there from different patients that Gail has euthanized. And of course, Karina ends up getting bitten, and she ends up, reanimating and turning. And Paul is barely able to escape, locking, his I think it was his girlfriend, Karina, locking her in with all the other zombies into the cafeteria. And then, of course, he chains up the doors and ends up spray painting, don't open dead inside, as I'm sure you guys all remember from that iconic scene. But one thing I'm sure a lot of people didn't pay attention to is how fresh that paint was, that he, because he had spray painted it on there. And when Rick goes out of his room after he wakes up, he goes out there and he sees, and we can all see for ourselves that that is very fresh paint. I know a lot of people probably missed it or didn't pay attention to that part, but that goes to show you how soon, Paul and Karina had came to the hospital before everything went down and Rick actually woke up. And so that basically tells you, after that point, Rick no longer had Dr. Gale on his side working for him, helping, be basically his guardian angel, which I'm sure she didn't even know Rick, but she just felt like it was her duty to continue to take care of her patients. And so after that point, Rick, no longer had any more saline bags to give him that IV drip and stuff like that. But like I said, at least with him being in this conservation state, he was able to stay alive for as long as possible, of course, with Dr. Gale's help. Well, after this, I'm sure it was only less than a week that Paul had chained those walkers up in there and ended up fleeing the hospital and leaving, on foot. Well, after Rick finally runs out of water, his brain is telling him, hey, look, we got no water. So it started forcing him to wake up and come out of this comatose state, which of course ends up making him, of course, wanting to call for the nurse, which the nurse is not anywhere near, nowhere to be found. And he, of course, looks over at these dead flowers, as you guys see here. and he grabs the flowers and realizes, man, how long have I been out for, And of course, he tries to get up and walk, which, with how long he's been in a coma, his legs are not gonna work with him right away. But he ends up finally making his way over, getting some water in him, which he desperately needed. And that's when he steps out of his room, goes over towards the cafeteria doors, and sees that, what Paul had spray painted, that message, don't open, dead inside. And that kind of gives you a timeline that, hey, this is how Rick was able to survive. He had Dr. Gale on his side for so long. He had Shane put this gurney in front of his door, and on top of that, he also had Paul come in and chain up a lot of these walkers, which allowed him to be able to escape on foot when Rick comes out, because he has no clue what's going on. And you also have to think, after it's all said and done, Rick is literally trying to figure everything out for himself. He has no clue of what's going on. And it's been all this time, and everyone looks at it as, man, he went weeks and weeks without any liquid, any fluid, any water in his system. But when AMC and the directors actually came out with the oath, that kind of really cleared everything up for me and explained to me, hey, this is how it's possible for him to be able to make it through. And so, trust me, guys, I was right there with a lot of you who were like, no way he was able to survive this. Like, that's crazy. How is that possible? And, thankfully, Dr. Gale didn't, see Rick wake up, because you could only imagine if Dr. Gale was still there while Rick woke up, she would have been, hey, this world is completely hopeless. There's walkers everywhere. You have nothing to live for. If you leave, you're just going to be torn to shreds. And she would be wanting to put him to sleep and euthanize him like the rest of her patients that, she was doing that to. So if you think about it, Rick really woke up in this perfect time frame, this perfect little window, because if it would have been any later, his brain wouldn't have been able to tell him to wake up and, hey, we need water kind of thing. And if it would have been any earlier, say before Paul and Karina showed up, then Dr. Gale would have still been there and probably would have wanted to euthanize him, probably against his will. And so thankfully he, had her as a guardian angel, but after she lost her mind, thankfully he didn't wake up in her presence, and that would have been horrible. And thankfully he didn't, wait any longer to wake up, because he might have never woke up. So that's kind of my take on everything. That's how it, kind of broke down from my perspective. And of course, you guys know, like, I have always been a huge Walking Dead fan. I've always been like super interested in the lore of the story and everything, the background. And you guys let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I've missed. I didn't want to break everything down all in this one episode, so you guys just let me know if there's anything else you guys want me to cover, any future videos or any other topics of discussion. And you guys know I just love to talk about anything The Walking Dead. Rick Grimes is our boy. Y'all know at the end of the day, he's just built different. That's how he was able to survive. That combined with, Dr. Gale taking care of him, thankfully, and Shane pushing that gurney up against his door, keeping him from being ripped to shreds by the walkers. And, just it was a perfect combination of everybody looking out for him. It's unfortunate Karina got bit and turned, but thankfully Paul was able to chain up the door. That also helped Rick be able to escape, the whole 9 yards, guys. So y'all let me know, do y'all agree with me? Do y'all think it's still absolutely impossible? What are you guys thinking? Let me know in the comments below. Like I said, drop a like for your boy. That would be greatly appreciated. Subscribe if you guys are new, because like I said, this is only episode 1, and we are going to continue to talk about everything The Walking Dead. This is our second video on The Walking Dead so far, and we're just going to continue. Anytime I see something discussion worthy and we're gonna just make a video about it. And like I said, if there's anything else you guys want me to make a video about, any other topics, y'all let me know. Your boy's gonna try to continue to go in order. And like I said, I appreciate each and every one of you guys, all the new subscribers, all the support. Shout out to you guys. As always, guys, God bless and peace out.